Bob Bartizek has built one of the most unique O-gauge model railroads you'll ever see. His layout is a point-to-point layout with staging yards. Harrisburg staging is at the east end, while Pittsburgh anchors the west end. A staging yard is nothing more than some hidden tracks where trains can be stored, off-stage. When it's time for them to appear on the stage, they head out from the staging yard to the layout, where they put on their performance and then go off stage again when their performance is completed. Here are Bob's two staging yards. Pittsburgh is on the upper level and Harrisburg is on the lower level. Now these tracks don't need to be scenic or ballasted because they're hidden. This tunnel is where trains from Harrisburg staging move on to the layout at Gap Junction.
Well, I'd always been interested in operating railroads. I've visited several and run on them, and it's just a lot of fun to switch cars and interact with the other people. It's much more a social hobby when you're in an operating session. If you're in your basement by yourself running trains, that's fun. It tends to be a little more fun when people come over to see your trains, and if you have 5 or 10 or 15 guys show up to run trains during an operating session, they're all talking to each other and interacting, and funny things happen that everybody laughs about, and there's much more social interaction, which I really like.
It's obvious that Bob enjoys the social aspect of the hobby. He also enjoys running his model railroad in a very realistic way, just like the prototype. But just what is realistic operation? Basically, it's making your model railroad do the same things that a real railroad does. The real railroads have customers to serve with various types of freight cars. They run local freights that stop along the line of road to pick up and set out cars as required by their customers. Operating sessions on the P&W can involve more than a dozen people, each with a specific operating assignment. Now that sounds like work, but it's really not.
We do work here. It's play work, but it's work. It's work. The customers get their empty cars or their loaded cars, whatever they're looking for. During an operating session, which lasts about 4 hours, we'll run 20 trains over the main line. There'll be 3 more industrial switching jobs that are run within anvil yard limits. We'll move about 300 cars, more or less. And anvil yard will classify about 90 cars inbound that have come in from trains and get classified into other trains to go out.
It takes two things to enjoy realistic operation like this: a layout designed for it and a good operating plan. Bob has both. Building a good operating plan is half the fun, and it's always changing.
Operation is an evolving thing. You come up with what you think is a good schedule, and it turns out the yard is swamped. They don't have time to do all this work. Well, that's easy. I'll just run a local out of staging and assume it was put together by some other yard somewhere. And it can come on the railroad, switch its town, and if the yard at that time has got time to work on things, I can run that local up to the yard in the schedule. And if the yard isn't able to do that in a few sessions, I'll say, okay, well, we'll just run that back to the other yard that's in staging. Through trains will come in and they'll drop or pick up blocks of cars in anvil. We don't have any big, long trains really that terminate in anvil. That would swamp the yard crew. It takes a lot of time to sort all those cars out. So we typically will have them do somewhere between 4 and 7 cars out of a given train. And they will sort those into locals. There's only one local that runs the whole railroad, and it comes out of staging. The anvil locals are all set up as turns, and they will either go one way or the other. They'll either go to the west end and they'll switch in Lebanon and possibly Summit and then come back to Anvil, or they'll come down and switch the east end. They'll do Franklin or the brewery or something like that and come back to Anvil. Those locals are between 6 and 12 cars long.
There's another aspect of operation on the Pennsylvania and Western that is fascinating. Bob has designed this railroad so that certain trains need helpers, or as the P Company called them, snappers, to get up the hill to Horseshoe Curve. The snappers are put on here at East Valley. This is train EC11, and he's heavy today. He'll need a snapper to get up the mountain. The crew brings the train into East Valley and stops with the cabin car just in the clear of the road crossing at the west end of town. The head end of the train is actually outside the tunnel over in West Valley. The East Valley snapper today is a burly 210 number 4668. The engineer moves the decapod out of the helper pocket and eases up to a coupling with the cabin car on EC11. Putting a snapper on a train is a very prototypical thing to do in heavy mountain-grade territory. The P Company did it every day back in the steam days. And in another nod to prototypical operation, when they're ready to go, EC11's engineer has to call the dispatcher and let him know the snapper's tied on and they're ready to move west.
EC11, the dispatcher.
This is dispatcher EC11.
EC11 is on the main between East and West Valley. We have our snapper. We're ready to go up the hill.
Okay, you are cleared on into Anvil on the main.
Cleared to Anvil on the main. Thank you.
Further up on the mountain, EC11, on the right, is hammering up the 3.5% grade. On the left, train PS21 has just passed through Lebanon. They're both passing Katanning Point, headed for Horseshoe Curve. Realistic snapper operation like this is easy with command control. Bob uses TMCC, not Legacy, to run his trains. After some experimentation, he found that the higher frequency Legacy signal just didn't have enough range to cover his entire basement. And since Bob is primarily concerned about just running trains, as opposed to using a lot of fancy features, TMCC works just fine on the Pennsylvania and Western. EC11's radio call to the dispatcher to get permission to roll out of West Valley is just one of many such communications made during an operating session on the Pennsylvania and Western.
AF48, progressing East Valley, holding the secondary.
Roger, thank you. PS21 calling the Anvil Yardmaster.
This is Anvil.
PS21's holding at the east signal.
Are you on the main or the secondary?
PS21's on the main.
Okay, we'll bring you down to thoroughfare track. You're dropping an engine, is that correct?
Oh, that is affirmative.
Okay, come on in.
CW28 holding the main at Summit.
Roger, thank you.
A three-rail layout built to operate like the real thing is very unusual. So unusual that sometimes, well, initial expectations aren't all that great.
I've had several people comment that when I first heard I was assigned to come and operate on a three-rail layout, I thought, oh, that doesn't sound very good, because you immediately think, you know, a loop around the Christmas tree or some such. But when they get here and actually see it, they forget about the third rail and just have a good time. And all of those people have said that when I first heard about it, I wasn't sure I wanted to come, but I'm really glad I did because I had a fantastic time. I even had an O-scale Proto 48 modeler here, a well-known guy, was here about a week ago. They use scale-sized wheel flanges. They're very picky about modeling all the joint bars between the sections of rail and to the nth degree. And so this guy came, I knew he was coming, and I knew he was a Proto 48 guy. And I said, yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to be received. But he came down the stairs, thought it was wonderful, had a bunch of questions about the Pensy, and spontaneously commented after he'd been here about 10 minutes. He says, you know, I don't even see that third rail anymore.
A lot of HO scale modelers have visited the Pennsylvania and Western, and all of them have been very impressed with this railroad.
The thing that a lot of the HO guys notice as well is the impact that O-scale trains and O-scale scenery and O-scale buildings have. I had one fellow that was here last May. We had a regional National Model Railroad Association convention in Dayton, and I was open for layout tours for that. And this fella came by himself down the stairs, and he got to the bottom of the steps, and he just stood like mesmerized, looking at the big buildings and the 10-stall roundhouse and all that. Then he walked slowly over till he was in front of the biggest building on the layout, which is the Pennsylvania House Furniture Factory in West Danville. It's 90 inches wide, and the water tanks that sit up on the roof are 73 inches off the floor. So it's a pretty imposing structure. So he stood there staring at that, and then he gradually panned to the right and saw the city buildings in the town of Annville. And he walked over that, and he's standing in front of the freight yard. And I said to him, "Welcome, glad you came." And he said, "Are you the owner?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Well, I'm pleased to meet you." He says, "I model HO." And he says, "I've been to a lot of really nice HO layouts, but this is so in your face."
In your face. I guess that's as good a way as any to describe Bob's Railroad. The stunning views here at Horseshoe Curve alone are enough to make that a valid statement. I asked Bob what he would say to encourage someone who was only slightly interested in the model train hobby to get more involved.
Well, I'd invite them to come and see the railroad, and then also invite them to come and see an operating session and see what the social interaction is like, and how layouts can really come alive when multiple people are operating. I had a three-rail friend of mine that had never operated before. He'd been here a couple times, and said, "John, why don't you come to an operating session?" He said, "Okay, I'll try that." And he came, and we gave him a couple of trains to run that basically just run across the main line and don't do a whole lot of work, because he was nervous about getting in somebody's way or fouling things up or whatever. And after that session, he pulled me aside and said that was the most fun he'd ever had with trains.
Having a good time enjoying the hobby is what this style of operation is all about. Now, there's a tremendous amount of enjoyment to be had being a loop runner, as Bill Bramlage would certainly confirm. But when the basement's full of good friends who all enjoy model trains the same way you do, that can bring the level of enjoyment of this hobby to a whole new level. What does this railroad do for Bob Bartizek?
It gives me a lot of satisfaction to have this railroad. If you have what I'll call a typical display layout, model railroad, whatever, that you run by yourself, you can get a lot of satisfaction from building it, from detailing it, from working on the locomotives so they run like a watch, whatever. And running trains, switching cars, all that by yourself is fun. There's no question about that. But when a group of guys show up to run this railroad and they really get into it, and there are 5 or 6 operating crews that are each running trains. So on this main line, there'll be 5 trains somewhere, either in motion, doing local switching, whatever. And for me to just watch that happen, it's magic. People say that the railroad comes alive when that happens, and it really does.